Welcome back to KHTS Radio. I'm Jade Aubuchon, KHTS Co-News Director, and I'm joined today by our former Assemblywoman Suzette Valladares, who is joining us today as a political consultant on some current bills. How are you today, Suzette?
Hello, Jade. It's so great to hear from you. I am doing well, recovering from the COVID. It finally caught up with me. It's been 3 years. I didn't get it for 3 years, but I finally caught it. So I feel like I caught up with the rest of my friends and family. But other than that, I am doing fine. I'm doing great.
Well, good. I am glad to hear you're doing well. How's that sense of taste and smell doing?
You know what? It is so bizarre because I don't have my sense of smell, but I have my sense of taste. So when I eat things, it's weird to feel like, oh yeah, I'm eating spaghetti, but I can't smell my spaghetti, but I can taste my spaghetti. It's the weirdest thing.
Hey, I'd take that any day. I'd rather taste things than smell things any day.
You know what, though? I agree, but I was kind of maybe looking forward to not tasting and not caring, so maybe I could, not want the cake or the ice cream and lose a few pounds, but, of course, that wouldn't happen that way for me.
I know, only in a perfect world. But hey, we're doing good, though. We're able to joke about COVID at this point, so you know what? We'll take it. But you're joining us today to talk about a couple of bills that are currently going through our Assembly and our Senate at the state level. So thank you so much for joining us on that, just to give us a little bit more insight. I know the first one we want to talk about is related to firearm sentencing enhancements, and that is AB 328. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jay, thank you so much, and KHTS for giving me the opportunity to still talk about a legislation that's happening up in Sacramento that directly impacts our community. There's still so much going on, and, we live in a world, and we live in LA County, where we all still see this rise in crime and rise in violent crime. And there's still a lot of work happening in Sacramento to address, how can we address this rise in crime? Which is exactly, some of the bills are still being presented in Sacramento, even bills that I worked on myself. But one of the bills that I've been following pretty closely is, you're right, AB 328, which is firearm sentencing enhancements. And as a matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, the Democrat-led Assembly Public Safety Committee had their public safety hearing, and they voted down some really good bills, which, is not surprising to me, but it's frustrating. So Assembly Bill 328 was written by Assemblymember Bill Asaley, and pretty much the objective was to restore mandatory 20-year to life prison sentences for those who use a gun in the process of a violent crime. And let's be really specific. A violent crime that would include murder, kidnapping, rape, assault with a firearm, assault against a law enforcement officer, and lewd acts with a child. And you know me, my heart and my passion has been, protecting children of all ages, especially our smallest children. So this bill would have restored the mandatory 20-year sentence for these horrific violent crimes. Common sense, right? The serious crimes deserve serious consequences. Part of the reason why I believe we're seeing a rise in crime is because we no longer have accountability, and the criminals have been emboldened across LA County and across California, so this is a common sense bill. Well, no, that wasn't, the thought process in the Democrat-led Public Safety Committee, because they voted the bill down, and they said that the bill was essentially racist and aimed towards perpetuating mass incarceration. And mind you, this is not, I agree we need social justice reform. The Black and Latino community have been impacted by our social justice system. But this bill has nothing to do with that. It really has to do with these serious violent offenders that need those longer sentences, one, so that victims have justice, but two, so that we're getting violent criminals off the streets, and hopefully actually putting some real resources towards rehabilitation while they're serving those sentences. Again, it was voted down. And it was just another example of how they're not getting it right in Sacramento. They're not protecting victims.
So just to clarify, because I'm noticing some similarities here between what you're describing and what some of the big detractors against our Los Angeles County District Attorney, George Gascon, a lot of the, I would say, criticism of his approach towards crime, which a lot of his detractors say that he's soft on crime, partially because he does not offer to apply sentencing enhancements when his DAs charge a case. How are those two similar? I mean, yes, we're talking about it at the county level versus the state level, but these sound really similar to me.
Yeah, so within the, social justice, I guess, would you say, reforms that have been happening over the past couple decades, you have this the sector of the public safety community that want social justice reforms, that want to get rid of all enhancements. So I saw this in the assembly. We got rid of gang enhancements. I voted against that, but it was something that was passed at the state level. We've seen this, and I do agree that some enhancements don't need, should be gotten rid of, and some need to happen, such as, committing lewd acts against a child involving a firearm, right? That's where I think we should go to protect victims. George Gascon, our district attorney, his role and his job is to implement the laws and the policies set forth by the legislature, by the county, by the city, and to follow through when people break the laws. Well, George Gascon's role has been one to not even charge certain people with certain crimes. And yes, another thing he's doing is not allowing or utilizing enhancements. And enhancements in some of the most grotesque crimes are necessary, but that is his approach. It's actually another reason. It's not just George Gascon. It's the DA in Oakland, Chesa Bodine, who was recalled, and other DAs across California that are choosing to pretty much take the law into their own hands, right? Meaning not charging people and criminals with what our laws say they should be and what those sentences should be. Mind you, I'm not an attorney. That's not my job. This is just what I'm seeing. So there's this whole movement that is happening both at the DA level with DAs like George Gascon, and then also happening with policies being passed or not passed at the statewide level.
Okay, very interesting. Yes, here in Santa Clarita, we saw some of that effect firsthand, unfortunately, when there was a murder a few years back of Michelle Dorsey, and she was tragically killed by her estranged husband, and they, as in the district attorney, had the option of filing an enhancement because he ended up committing breaking and entering, which was technically breaking and entering and attempted kidnapping, which then enhanced the murder that he then later committed, and that was not charged. So that's partially why I brought that up, because it's something that I know that has bothered a lot of our constituents and your former constituents here in the Santa Clarita Valley for some time.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, and we've been impacted. It's kind of crazy, but it's been over in nearly 2 decades since Dave March, who was a law enforcement officer in our community, who lots of my friends actually that he worked at Six Flags Magic Mountain knew Dave, was also killed by a gang member. And, enhancements are key, to deter and to provide serious consequences for serious actions. And there's a huge disconnect, I think, with our legislators, with some of those in the social justice reform arena, that there's just a disconnect. And I think there's too often they want to say we can't have it both ways, right? Well, I think that we can. I think we can draw important lines. We can hold serious violent criminals accountable. We can work on rehabilitation when they're actually in custody. We have a great fire training facility at LA County, which offers phenomenal rehabilitation training and programs with working on fires. And, we can do both.
Oh, yeah, the inmate fire program is absolutely amazing here in LA County. We've done some really awesome stories on that. Now, let's move on to our next bill that we wanted to discuss here. That was AB 257, which is, I'd say, kind of connected to this whole overall look at how our system works and how it treats people. Essentially, what it would be doing is banning hopeless encampments from being within about 500 feet of schools, daycare centers, parks, and libraries. There has been some pushback on this, which I would love to discuss with you. But first off, what's your overall look at AB 257?
Yeah, so AB 257 is a homeless encampment ban near school. That's the title of the bill. It's actually something that I was looking at proposing and moving forward, last year, and I, had started writing the bill. And fortunately, Assemblymember Josh Hoover out of Sacramento picked up that bill because it really is common sense. We saw that it was actually born out of a Los Angeles City ordinance, 41.5 or 0.9, don't quote me on that, but it's 41 point something, that just does exactly this. We see it in Santa Clarita, the growing problem of encampments. If you go to the San Fernando Valley, if you go to Skid Row, you see encampments. And this is not just like one simple little, tent. It is a true encampment where you have cardboard boxes, you have makeshift kitchens, you have, God knows what in some of those encampments. We see it everywhere on residential sidewalks, on business corners, in parks. And LA City said, you know what, yes, we need to do more, and we're working on addressing our homeless issue. That also is connected with mental health, with drug addiction, with the high cost of living, with the lack of affordable housing. All of those are key factors. But what we are also responsible for doing is keeping our communities safe, and particularly keeping our most vulnerable communities and our kids safe. So the city ordinance, which was passed at the LA city level, and mind you, there is not a single Republican, not one Republican that sits on Los Angeles City Council. The city council voted in favor of banning encampments 500 feet from schools, from parks, from child care centers. This is common sense. A 3-year-old walking to their daycare with their mother should not have to walk over, heroin needles, or walk in filth through a sidewalk, or see, a naked person with mental health issues, or perhaps that is on drugs, as they're walking into preschool, as they're going to play at the park. This is just really common sense. It didn't pass. It did not pass. It was presented, again, in the Democrat-led Public Safety Committee, and they said no. They like to, right now they're speaking in a lot of these generalities about shifting your focus from criminalizing homelessness. No, it wouldn't have criminalized homelessness. It just would have said that you cannot have encampments, and it defined encampments, which is not just one tent, it's multiple tents, statewide within a city, statewide within parks, child care centers, schools, libraries. So the places where kids frequent, you can't have an encampment there. We're not criminalizing it. And again, there's this false dichotomy, or this narrative that you can't address homelessness and keep people safe, and keep the public safe, and keep kids safe. You can. That's just not the priority. And I think, who was it, Nancy Pelosi, who said it best, show me your budget and you'll show me your priorities. Well, the same goes with policy. If we're not passing policies to protect kids, then we're not doing our job.
So, connected to something you said about some vulnerable communities, some of the arguments that I saw against passing this bill was that you could argue that the homeless are also a vulnerable community, considering how it often includes people who are mentally ill or who are working through other issues. And one of the quotes from the original bill, it may have changed by the time it was shot down, was that the bill would have prohibited a person from, and I quote, sitting, lying, sleeping, or storing, using, maintaining, or placing personal property within 500 feet of schools, daycare centers, parks, and libraries. And one of the arguments I saw was, well, looking at the language of this bill, would this ban someone who is homeless from essentially just sitting on a park bench?
Yeah, no, not at all. And, I'm not familiar with that language, but I am more familiar with this particular bill's language. And the bill does go into explaining what an encampment is.
Okay.
So three or more tents, right? Not just somebody who, you're not banning somebody who is homeless from using a park bench to sit, to read a book, for using those common places that we all enjoy. That's not what you're doing. You're saying this bill is saying you can't have encampments. Okay. And that is to keep kids safe within 500 feet from a school. So absolutely, our homeless population is a vulnerable community. We passed care courts last year to help address the mental health and drug addiction portion of this crisis, which is a huge part of that. I am somebody who thinks, again, we can do both. We can keep kids safe, and we can get people the help that they need. But I also, and I've said this for a long time, we need to provide the beds, the mental health facilities, the workforce, the programs to get people off of the streets, and we have to get people off of the streets.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big concerns that most people have when they hear bills like this is, we've all heard the stories of, all right, we're cleaning up the homeless, we're cleaning up Skid Row. Well, how did they do that? They rounded up all of these people who are vulnerable in one way or another, put them on buses, and shift the problem somewhere else. And that is, I think we can all agree that on a certain level that is inhumane because of the way you are treating people. And the argument that I hear from our readers and from our listeners is that what is step 2? And that seems to be the big hang up for a lot of our listeners whenever they hear bills like this. What's your perspective on that?
Right. Well, unfortunately, the way that, state laws work and the way that government works is messy. And very rarely, I haven't seen any, bill that, whether it's on homelessness, whether it's on public safety, whether it's on cost of living, we don't have these huge bills that include every solution for a single issue. Because most issues that we're facing here, whether it's homelessness, whether it's cost of living, housing affordability, they're not simple fixes, right? We know that this is a problem. We know that the problem of having encampments near schools is not good for kids, is something that we have to address. And we have all these other things that we're working on, and sometimes people don't always see the bites and pieces of policy solutions or bad, solutions that are addressing the issue. Homelessness is a complex issue. We in California have, over 160,000 people in LA County live on the streets. In California, 25% of the nation's unhoused live in California. And it didn't happen overnight. It's continuing to grow. We've seen it, rapidly increase, especially because of COVID the past couple of years. And the reasons why people are homeless are different. You have all of these different populations of people that are homeless for different reasons: mental health, drug addiction, lack of housing. You have some people that, recently lost their job and they're just, homeless for a month. They use Bridge to Home, but, sometimes for, transitional housing. There's not an easy fix. There's just simply not. And it's something I think that we're going to be continuing to need to work on for, decades in California. But some things like this that are pretty simple: let's keep our kids safe. We've allocated billions of funding in last year's assembly budget and in last year's legislative budget. In this year's legislative budget, there's more money for homelessness, and countywide, there's more money for homelessness. We're doing all those other things, but this is an important component of it as well.
Yeah, I think when it comes to some of these issues, I think the main argument that I pretty much hear is that there is no one and done solving an issue. It is, if you want to handle the issue, it's just like, I'm going to say it's just like handling mental health or handling an addiction. You don't solve it. You don't end having an addiction. It is
Mm-hmm.
something there, you are always an addict. You are just an addict in recovery. And the way you handle that is you take one step at a time, constantly moving forward. And that appears to be the idea that I'm hearing when it comes to handling some of these large scale social issues, is that it is a constant process of tackling the issue, not a one and done solving.
Absolutely, and I think we've probably had this conversation before. I have family members and close family members that have had, severe drug addiction. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen what drug addiction does firsthand to people, to family. And you're absolutely right. Even though I have family members that have been sober for, probably going on 15, almost 20 years now, they identify themselves as always being an addict. As a matter of fact, I have another good friend who's an elected official who, they can tell their story, but they still call themselves an addict even though they've been sober for 30 years. 30 years. So I think you're right. We're going to have to take the long-term approach to handling, homelessness and all of the issues connected to it.
Absolutely. Which actually, homelessness factors into our next and, as far as I know, final bill for conversation today, which is SB 843, was the last name for the bill that I think that was presented, and it pertains to taxation and renters credit. How does that work?
Yeah. So, last year I was a big, Senator Glazer presented a bill which would have increased the renter's tax credit. And we know, I think the thing that most of probably your listeners, most of my friends are worried about right now is the cost of living,
Mm-hmm.
the cost of rent. People who want to buy a house can't afford to buy a house because, I think the median income, the median home price in Santa Clarita is upwards of $800,000. And then you have an additional, really high, because of the recession, you have really high interest rates. So people can't afford housing, right? And when you can't afford housing to buy a house, we also see that the lack of supply causes the rents to go up. So for a long time, for actually 4 decades, we recognize that, hey, homeowners get a tax credit. Why can't renters receive some of the same benefits even though they're not homeowners, right? They're a part of the housing equation because they're renters. So 4 decades ago, we said, yeah, you can get a $60 tax credit. Well, welcome to 2023, where, inflation is up, the cost of living is up. It's very, expensive to live and stay in California. Let's revisit that. So Senator Glazer proposed a bill that would increase it from $60 to $500 an individual, up to $1,000 a couple. And let me just tell you, I think this is one thing we need to be doing for renters in the state of California, increasing that. Let's get it up to 2023 standards. Let's make it $1,000. Let's give some people some more money in their pockets. We need to be doing a lot of other things. I'm going to be watching this bill pretty closely, especially since we're seeing that there is a statewide initiative that is trying to qualify to be on the ballot for 2024 that would impose statewide rent control. And I oppose statewide rent control because, again, this comes to government, one, picking winners and losers, and we can do things that both benefit renters, or we can pass policy and fiscal policy that is good for renters and that is good for homeowners, but we shouldn't be taking this one size approach and really at the end of the day putting it on the backs of homeowners and some of those mom and pop homeowners that bought an extra rental property to help with their golden years and retirement years. Let's not impact them, but let's help people who need help.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that explanation. We're coming to the end of our time here today. And first off, I wanted to thank you so much for calling in. I know that we are scheduled to do this potentially next month as well. Do you have anything additional you'd like to share with your former constituents?
I'd just like to thank everyone for your support, for listening to us today, for giving me the opportunity to continue to talk about important policy and legislation that is happening in Sacramento that needs to happen. I'd highly encourage you to reach out to KHTS via Twitter, social media, email. Tag me, tag Jade if you have anything you want us to talk about in terms of Sacramento and California policy. Reach out to us. You can find me at my Twitter handle, is at Suzette Martinez. Go to SuzetteValladares.com. Email us, get a hold of us, be a part of the conversation.
Absolutely. You took the spiel right out of my mouth, but thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. If you're listening, please reach out to us if you have any questions about any upcoming bills that Suzette and I can talk about or anything going on in Sacramento. We would love to have your opinion. That way we can really dial in on what is important to the people here in Santa Clarita. So until next time, thank you so much, Suzette.
Thank you, Jade.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to have more info about your local news, you can tune into KHTS FM 98.1 AM 1220 or visit it on hometownstation.com.